everyone and welcome back to another video. So for the next couple of clips you are going to see, this was actually part of another video where I was reviewing a set of books, but once I went into the editing mode I was like, girl, you talked a lot about these books. So I thought, because I've never done a Dark Eden review on my channel, I would just make it a separate review video. The only difficulty with that is if I was going to do it, like, you know, if I was going to again sit down and film a review video of it, I would have wanted to talk about the book in definitely much more detail and definitely talk about spoilers. And if you haven't read the trilogy, this video definitely will contain spoilers. I tried to keep it very spoiler free, but actually when I was also editing it, I was like, actually some of these things are spoilers, so bear that in mind if you want to watch this and you haven't read the books. Then perhaps, like, if you don't want spoilers, this is not for you. But I do talk about the book and give, like, I guess close to as a review that I would ever do for Dark Eden. There's so much more that I could have reviewed in it, but I do feel like this encapsulates a lot of the thoughts and feelings that I have about each of the books. And it's definitely a trilogy that I really like. Even though, like, I read it in January, I'm just like, I'm going to read it again. I really enjoyed it. Like, and you'll hear my thoughts of how sort of my thoughts changed on one of the books compared to when I first read it. And yeah, for me it was really good to reread the series. So yeah, please enjoy the video, and obviously I would just cut to past Sandra. So on to the 3 books that I reread, guys. When I did my year of reading science fiction, these were the books that I discovered were just top tier for me. Really like them. The first one of them is Dark Eden, and still love it. Do you know what? Reading this, I picked up on so much more things that I think are issues in terms of disability and disfigurement. So I'm a bit like, oh man, I get it, but at the same time I think a lot of the way it's referenced and how other people in the society talk about it, it's not great, because it very much mirrors our society, and I don't know if when you're writing you want a little bit of a chance to change that. But I don't know. No, I don't know how I feel about it. So Dark Eden is a sci-fi trilogy written by Chris Beckett, and this definitely has to be the first fave. Like, it's amazing. This opens up in the world of Eden, a very dark planet, I'm going to say. And it says here, you live in Eden, you're a member of the family, one of the 532 descendants of Angela and Tommy. This Dark Eden is essentially populated by Angela and Tommy. They flew over with 3 men went across, and then Angela and another man was sent over to go and bring these guys back. And then they went across from Earth. Earth at the time had its own problems. You don't really find that out until, like, the last book. So these guys came out here, she went to go and chase them. The other 3 decided, right, we're going to take the spaceship back. And Angela and Tommy decide they're going to stay on this planet. They stay on this planet, they have kids. Have kids, yes, it is that. And essentially there ends up being quite a huge population on this planet. I say population, 532 people. But already within these 532 people, people are split into groups. And clearly the stories they've been told from Angela and Tommy, you can see it everywhere. So they have groups called Brooklyn, London, Peckham Way, which is obviously, like, Angela was from London, and I think obviously they must have spoken to them about America and things like that. And so we have one of the main characters, John Red Lantern, who basically is tired of the family's old traditional ways. The family essentially stay in the area that the spaceship landed, where their family were born, because they believe one day Earth is going to come back and take them home. So they're trying not to move from there, because when Earth comes, they want to be there. But food is running out, and it's clear that they need to expand in the spaces that they're in. They can't stay there forever. And in the back here it does say, you are John Red Lantern, you will break the laws of Eden, shatter the family and change history. You will be the first to kill another, the first to venture into the dark, and the first to discover the truth about Eden. And basically John Red Lantern is about 15 years old or something. He's a mouthy little shite, but he really thinks that they're wasting their time. They need to explore more of Eden, they need to find out just what is in the world. He's tired of the same old routine that they do. And essentially he does something which the first time I read it I couldn't agree with, the second time I couldn't agree with, but I get it. It's the story arc that's needed for him to be sort of expelled from the family in order to then go, like it says, change history, venture into the dark. And that's what he does. He does something that breaks some of the traditions that these guys have, and it's very helpful to a lot of the people in the family, so they decide to expel him. And it's very interesting, the family that they live in. It's quite matriarchal. A lot of the leaders are women. There's never been a killing, as you hear. It says back here, John will be the first to kill. There's never been a killing or anything like that. So John leaves. He goes and is like, elsewhere. And you also find out more about society in terms of like sex, and like I said, in terms of disfigurement, there are people who have cleft palates, and I think they call them clawfoots, but I'm not sure what that's in reference to. But yeah, they call people with cleft palates like bat faces, and then obviously there are other people that don't have those disfigurements. And then yeah, you just find out that the rules around sex are quite loose. There's no sort of, it has to be man and woman who are married or things like that. People have sex with other people because they're trying to increase their population, and there's no sort of you belong to this person or things like that. And they don't have an issue with that. There's no sort of qualms. Everything is brought to like family meetings and things like that. All very peaceful. Of course there's disagreements, but there's no sort of real violence or anything like that. So John is expelled, lives out by himself, maybe like a week or something like that. And then there are other kids that basically follow him. He has a couple of friends and stuff like that. His cousin George, I'm going to say. It's so funny because when I talk about the other two, I'm going to mention why it's so interesting, the people's names that you forget. George and George's brother is named Jeff. And Jeff has the clawfoot that they talk about, which I can't remember what that exactly is. Follow him. A woman named Tina Spiketree follows him. And those are sort of the main four. And really I should say the main three. And then a couple of other people follow them. And essentially what they do is they explore more of Eden. In most parts they are forced to, because people from the family, and they now are referenced as the old family, like sort of come looking for them. And in the incident where John kills, really is an incident of something really terrible is about to happen to one of the members. And because they're a society where, there are not really any rules around sex and things like that, for something like that to happen is a bit, it's out of character. It really is out of character. And it's just a case of, I think, a lot of adrenaline and killing in the moment. And that basically shapes the story in terms of, at first they were just kind of people out there, but then essentially they become a bit like fugitives. And they explore, they find different things, people come and go within their family, and it essentially just divides the family. And what happens is things change, and things really do change. One of the guys that was really for John leaving was a character named David, who is what they call a bat face. And essentially, it's interesting, the family split so that you have the sort of John folk and the David folk. And it's interesting in terms of stories and legends who is remembered. John split the family, and then David took over the old family, because it just seemed that the minute John left, I don't know, David gained some sort of power over like the women in the old ways, and essentially their society changes, and you see the reflection of that in the next couple of books. And I think Chris Beckett, is really trying to say something on large about the sort of change of hands of where decisions are made and where the power leads, and how that reflects on the society and the family. So yeah, that's what happens in this first book. You sort of flip between different perspectives of John, Tina, Jeff, maybe Jerry as well, and I'm gonna say Jerry is the one who gives us really good insight, because Jerry's kind of dumb, but he really adores John. Whereas everyone else has quite strong, unique personalities. But yeah, that is Dark Eden. A really, really brilliant book. I think the first time I read it, I gave it 4 stars, still gave it 4 stars because I really, really enjoyed it. So the next in the trilogy is, no, it's not that one. Is it? I just get so confused with it. No, it is definitely Mother of Eden. I get really confused with the way they're laid out, just because one's called Daughter of Eden, one's called Mother of Eden. This one I originally gave 2 stars when I read it, and 100% I was on the hype of the Dark Eden hype, and I wanted the book to be exactly like that. It wasn't, so I was like, oh God, this isn't great. But upon reread, I bumped it up a star, because I actually think what it says about society and the way the societies have developed is actually what's more important here than wanting to hear the story of John Red Lantern and carry on that adventure with John Red Lantern. Because what happens in this book is it's several generations later, and you see the sort of fallout. So it says here, generations after the breakup of the human family of Eden, the John folk emphasise knowledge and innovation, and the David folk tradition and cohesion. Both claim to be the favoured children of the long dead woman from Earth that all Eden know as Gila, the mother of them all. And yeah, so you're a few generations later where the societies have rapidly developed, and yes, the legends are about John and the legends are about David, but it's so interesting to see who has been forgotten. Because even in Dark Eden, there are a couple of elders that they have in terms of the anniversary. I actually think one of the guys, his name is Mitch or Tommy or something like that. He was the great grandson of Tommy. you know, Tommy and Angela, and then, you know, they had all these rituals and stuff. They're not even like mentioned in this book, like they're not remembered. And when I spoke about the 4 and I then said 3 characters, it's because you see in this book that there's been a split off. There's the David folk, there's the John folk, but within the people that went with John, there's also little splits off of that. So there's the Jeff folk, and Jeff is the one I said that had the clawfoot. His cousin Jerry is not even mentioned. He's not got people. And then later you also find out like Tina and Spike Tree, there's also people with her, and it's a very woman-led area. So it's interesting to see, like, in terms of the stories, who remains in these legends that we talk about. But yes, in this story, it is about one of the women from the Jeff folk, and Jeff's, I don't really speak about Jeff a lot in this book, and I really want to do a sit down and talk about Dark Eden, so maybe I'll skip over this in terms of Jeff. But Jeff really much was the sort of, like, I want to say spiritual vibes guy. He very much was just like, you know, we are here. And it really reminds me of my tattoo, which is Be Here Now, which is about living in the moment. But Jeff really wasn't into all this violence and stuff like that, and he was very, like, into nurturing animals, and he's the first one that sort of trained some of the animals that they had to, like, let them ride them. So it's about Starlight Brooking. It says here, she meets a handsome man across the wild pool. She lives in like essentially a little fishing village, and it's Jeff's one. They don't really prioritise innovation or traditional cohesion. They're just in the middle, and when the David folk and John folk are fighting, they're like, we ain't part of this. But Starlight, again, it's a bit like John, has a sense of adventure. And what has happened in the society is it's developed so much that they now have a marketplace, and that's where people go to trade. And Starlight wants to really go there. Rattled is able to assemble some family members, and they go across there, and yeah, she meets this handsome man who essentially turns out to be like a little bit like a prince. He is the headman's son of the guy who's currently like the man in the John folk side. So, you know, he's a really important person, and he needs to choose like a wife, and he sees Starlight, and he's just bowled over. So him and Starlight basically go over. She like says goodbye to her family and just goes over to his place. Nice. And one of the things I'm going to read is the Goodreads blurb, because it gives you a little, not blurb, but it just has a little bit more info. So it says here, now humanity has spread across Eden and 2 kingdoms have emerged. Both are sustained by violence and dominated by men, and both claim to be the favoured children of Judah, yada yada yada. And it's the sort of violence and men, and I think it's just what he's trying to say in terms of the first society where it was ruled essentially by women. There were a couple of men that were leaders as well, but there was no violence, and it's like their society has completely changed. They've developed like weapons and things like that, and it just wasn't a thing in Dark Eden. It just wasn't a thing. So yeah, Starlight goes over to the John folk, and there's this whole thing where, well, you can say it in here because it's in the back of the book, so I won't really try and ruin it, but it says, she has no idea that she will be a stand-in for Gila herself and wear Gila's ring on her own finger. So one of the things that's really important in this book is mementos, the things that they have from the people from Earth. And one of the stories that they tell about Angela, she got really angry, lost her ring, couldn't find her ring. Of course, when John is exiled, he finds her ring. And it is this ring that Starlight ends up wearing. And it's just so interesting to hear about, you know, how much you put people on a pedestal, like Angela is their mother. And on both sides, Angela is like the chosen woman, like she's the woman of legends and stories. Tommy doesn't even really get a look in, but it's very interesting because they look up to the mother, but actually, as most societies do, they look really down on women, don't really favour women, they treat women like crap. But yeah, Starlight ends up being essentially the stand-in for the mother, and it's just like, she's just essentially someone who goes around, I guess, a bit like the Pope, and people like want to touch the ring and are like screaming and just like believe in miracles that happen when she's nearby. But what is happening in terms of them two is Starlight, and I think his name is Greenlight or something, or Green Lantern, I don't know what his name is, I really don't know what the guy's name is. His father is dying, and obviously in a position like that, he has to make some strategic decisions to make sure that other people in the area follow him, don't try and overthrow him and things like that. And his dad really thinks he hasn't got the willpower, but he sees it in Starlight. But of course, Starlight is from a village where they don't do half the stuff that they do here. There are no low people and high people, and essentially it's just like having rich people and like non-rich people and really poor people. Her village has not developed any of those hierarchies, so she's quite shocked when she goes to the John folk area to see all of this, and she really wants to change that in society. That does not go well for her. It does not go well for her or for a Green Lantern. and things happen. It doesn't go well for them. And the ending of this is quite interesting. It's interesting again to see like the different societies and what they prioritize. But it is like towards the end of this book that we do find out about the Tina Spiketree sort of group and the sort of all female led group, and the way they sort of decide things like they do back in the way that the old family was. So I thoroughly enjoyed this. I enjoyed this very much for its commentary on, you know, his different perceptions of how families had developed in terms of the violence and being run by men, but also in terms of like the split between people, the use of animals and caging animals, even though they are sentient beings. I enjoyed it so much for listening to about how stories are warped, a lot of the stories about things that actually happened, and we know this because we've read the first book, and but how they have been changed in this society to favour certain people. It's just so much commentary in here about like myths, legends. I'm here for it. I really, really enjoyed it. Finally, in this book we have Daughter of Eden, and this is told from the perspective of Angie. Angie Red Lantern. And Angie is a bat face, so one of the people that has a cleft palate, and this focuses on kind of two parts. It's very interesting. So it says here, Angie Red Lantern is the first to spot the boat. So essentially they are at war and they become refugees, and they have to travel over sort of, because the David folk was split out originally from where their family was, they kind of travel back to that place, if that makes sense, like the Mecca. Angie is actually a character we've met before. I didn't mention this in Mother of Eden, but Angie is a character we've met before because she is actually Starlight's best friend, and she gets left behind obviously by Starlight. So one of the things that happens during both of these books is they have these things called shadow speakers, people who say that they can speak to the dead, and, you know, are saying that they can hear Angela's voice, and this is what Angela is saying. So a shadow speaker comes to Angie's village, and I think after the back of her friend leaving and her thinking, what am I going to do, she ends up going with this shadow speaker who speaks to her and, you know, tells her she's beautiful and all of these things, and she just gets taken with her. So she goes with this shadow speaker, and they essentially travel all over Eden, like speaking to different people and things like that, and, you know, trying to get them to believe the word, essentially. So the chapters alternate between Angie's time with Mary the shadow speaker, but also the current day of her travelling with her kids and things like that. And it's very interesting. The sad thing about this book is it says here that they travel. It says here that Angie must flee with her family across the pitch black of snowy dark to the place where it all started. The stone circle where the people from Earth first landed, where the story of Julia, the mother of them all, began. It is there that Angie witnesses the most extraordinary event, one that will change the history of Eden forever. I can't tell you. It's so obvious what it is once you read the books, and perhaps you already know from me saying, but I don't want to spoil it for you. But it's very interesting. I think actually I like the way he handled what happened next. And I like the way the society handled what happened next, because I think it really does show that when the truth is put in front of you, how do you accept it when the life that you've been living is so different and you've been told of this promise, and perhaps that doesn't come to fruition. But what was, I guess, I found it very heavy-handed, the chapters with Mary, the shadow speaker. I really could care less for any of that stuff. I don't care for it very much in real life when it's, you know, people standing on soapboxes in the street, and that's essentially what Mary is. You know, you do get maybe a bit more insight into her, and perhaps, you know, you don't feel like she's a con artist or anything like that, but I'm just not that interested in it. I thought it was nonsense, but I also thought it was interesting that the author decided to focus on that, because actually we do hear a lot about, in the other books, about the people who are higher up and things like that, so perhaps it was quite nice to see it from this perspective, especially because of her being, essentially them being two people that were on the outs but managed to travel all over, had protection and things like that. It was okay, I just didn't think we needed to, I didn't think every other chapter really needed to focus on that. But yeah, overall as a series it was just super interesting, a really, really nice series, and I think just reading it the second time out I just got so much more from it. Like in Mother of Eden, one of the quotes, actually I'll read it to you, one of the quotes in Mother of Eden, so it's where Starlight, you know, is the stand-in and is wearing the ring. It says here, we speak of a mother's love but we forget her power, and it's so interesting because they all worship Angela but actually they see women as such a lower class to them, and that is in, I guess, all societies bar the society that Starlight is from, which is the Jess folk, and the society that Tina Spiketree started. But other than that, they treat women so poorly, and yet they all worship Angela. So it's very interesting later when, I don't know, I guess they find out more about her. So that was the trilogy that I reread, and it was so nice to reread something that I knew I really enjoyed. I think I got towards the end of last year and was just like, books are pissing me off, I really don't enjoy them. So it was really, really nice to get stuck into a trilogy that I really, really enjoyed, and it just was the perfect way to start off my year. And because there's not an outro for this video, because of course it was part of a longer wrap up, I am just popping in here to say bye and thank you guys so much for watching. If you have read Dark Eden and you want to chat about it, please just let me know in the comments down below. I probably missed out tons of things in my reviews, maybe you saw things differently, so yeah, I'd love to have a chat. And if you haven't read it but you're intrigued to read it, definitely do let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in another video. Bye.